"You're just the
Look at the floor.
driver,"
It's slowing
my
us down.
son-in-law said,
You can't keep
loud
up.
enough for
Step
every
aside.
dispatcher, mechanic, and office clerk in that building to hear. The room went so quiet I could hear the old wall clock ticking above the freight board. A young driver named Luis looked down at his boots like the words had hit him instead of me. Martha, our bookkeeper, stopped typing with both hands, still hovering over the keyboard. Brandon Cole stood behind the counter in his pressed shirt and shiny watch, smiling like he had finally reminded the old man where he belonged. He pushed my fuel receipt back across the counter with 2 fingers. "Maybe next time, Walter. Read the rules before you come in here asking for money." I looked at the receipt, folded it once, and put it in my shirt pocket. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell him who owned the trucks parked outside, or the contracts pinned to that wall,
I'm here
or
to
the
review
building
the
he was
company
standing
ledger.
in. I only turned to Martha and said, "Bring me the company ledger." My name is Walter Hayes. I am 66 years old, and most mornings I wake before the sun has even thought about touching the edge of the highway. My knees complain before my mouth does. My hands are stiff until I run warm water over the knuckles. I own 3 good flannel shirts, 2 pairs of work boots, and 1 habit I have never been able to break. I still walk around every truck before I trust it with a load. Tire pressure, brake lines, oil stains, straps, lights, mirrors. A man can lie to your face, but a truck usually tells the truth if you know how to listen. That was how I built Hayes County Freight. Not from an office chair, not from golf lunches, not from talking down to men with grease under their fingernails. I built it by driving routes nobody wanted, sleeping in cheap motels when snow closed the pass, and promising every man who climbed into one of my cabs that he would never be treated like a disposable body on my watch. The first office of my company was not an office at all. It was a fold-in table in the kitchen of the small house I shared with my wife, Helen. We had 2 used trucks then. One had a heater that only worked when it felt generous, and the other had a passenger door that rattled so loudly Helen said it sounded like a jar full of bolts. She kept the books by hand in a green ledger while I drove. At night, I would come home smelling like diesel and road dust, and she would be at that table with a pencil tucked behind her ear, asking me if Henderson Foods paid on time, or if Carter Mill still owed us for the Wednesday run. She had a way of tapping the pencil twice when a number did not sit right with her. "Paper remembers," she used to say. "Men forget what they said. Paper does not." After she passed, I kept that old green ledger in the company safe, not because the numbers still mattered, but because her handwriting was in it. Those pages were the first proof that Hayes County Freight had been built by 2 tired people who refused to quit. My daughter Emily grew up around truck yards and dispatch radios. When she was little, she would sit on the running board of my oldest rig and pretend she was giving orders to the whole fleet. Helen would laugh and tell me the child had more authority in her voice than half the men at the loading docks. Emily was the reason I kept pushing after Helen got sick, and she was the reason I did not sell the company when the doctors and bills and lonely evenings made everything feel heavier than freight. I wanted Emily to inherit something clean, not just trucks and contracts, but a name people respected, a place where men and women could work hard and still go home with dignity. That was what I thought I was protecting when I let Brandon Cole into our family. Brandon did not look dangerous when Emily first brought him home. Men like him rarely do. He was polite, polished, quick with compliments, and careful to call me Mr. Hayes whenever Emily was in the room. He told me he admired what I had built. He said family businesses needed fresh eyes. He said the trucking industry was changing and Old companies either adapted or disappeared. I did not like the way he said old, but Emily looked happy sitting beside him at my dinner table, and a father learns to swallow small doubts when his daughter smiles like that. After the wedding, Brandon started helping with office systems, then dispatch, then vendor accounts. He had a head for software, and I will give him that. He could read a schedule fast, spot an inefficient route, negotiate with a customer without blinking. At first, I thought ambition was all I was seeing. Then the small things began. He stopped learning drivers' names and started calling them by truck numbers. Put 18 on the cold storage run. Tell 24 he is late again. If 31 complains, replace him. I would correct him quietly. His name is Luis. Or, that is Ray, and his wife is in the hospital. Brandon would smile like I was telling an old story nobody needed. Walter? You cannot run a modern operation on sentimental attachments. He said things like that often. Modern operation, efficiency, liability, replaceable. Words that sounded clean in a meeting but dirty when you watched how they landed on people who had given their backs to your company. By then, I was no longer standing behind the counter every day. I had chosen that on purpose. Some owners need everyone to know they are owners. I never did. The company was legally structured through holdings and old paperwork most of the staff had never needed to read. I took a driver's schedule because I liked the road, and because I learned more from a loading dock conversation than most men learned from a quarterly report. Drivers told the truth around another driver. Mechanics told the truth around an old man holding a flashlight under a hood. Clerks told the truth when they thought you had no power over their paycheck. So I wore my flannel, drove my routes, signed what needed signing through Martha, and let people believe what made them comfortable. Martha Bell had been with us for 22 years. She was 5 feet tall, wore reading glasses on a chain, and could smell a bad number from across a room. Helen trusted her. That meant I trusted her before she ever proved herself, and she proved herself every month after. Martha did not gossip. She did not dramatize. If she came to me with a paper in her hand and that tight look around her mouth, I listened. The first time she showed me an altered freight invoice, we were standing in the narrow file room behind dispatch. Rain tapped against the metal roof. She held out 2 copies of the same Henderson Foods invoice, same load number, same delivery date, different payment routing. This one was sent to the customer, she said. This one was entered into our system after the payment cleared. I looked at the numbers for a long time. The difference was not large enough to sink a company. That was the clever part. It was just large enough to disappear if nobody loved the books. Could be a mistake, I said, though I already knew Martha would not have brought it to me for a mistake. She tapped the second page with one finger. Then we have had the same mistake 9 times in 4 months. I remember looking through the small glass window in the file room door. Brandon was outside, leaning over the dispatch counter, laughing with a customer on the phone. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man standing on ground he believed belonged to him. Martha lowered her voice. What do you want me to do? I thought of Emily. I thought of her sitting at my kitchen table, telling me Brandon worked too much but meant well. I thought of what an accusation could do to a marriage if I made it too soon and proved too little. So I said the only thing I could say. Copy everything, quietly. That was how the audit folder began. Not with a confrontation, not with a threat. With one copied invoice and Martha's careful handwriting on a plain label. review file. I did not call it fraud then. I did not call it theft. A man should be careful with words that can burn down a family. But every month the folder got thicker. A maintenance vendor no mechanic remembered using. A freight payment that arrived on Monday but was not entered until Friday, with a fee nobody could explain. Fuel reimbursements processed in cash when company policy required direct logs. Small withdrawals, small edits, small lies. That was Brandon's style. He did not kick the door down. He shaved the frame a little at a time and trusted nobody would notice the house leaning. At home, Emily noticed something, but not the thing itself. She noticed Brandon coming home with new confidence and less patience. She noticed the watch, the new truck, the way he checked his phone during dinner and smiled at messages he would not explain. One Sunday evening, she invited me over for pot roast, the way Helen used to make it. I wore a clean shirt and brought peach pie from the grocery store because I had never learned to bake the one Helen made. Brandon was already at the table when I arrived, one arm across the back of Emily's chair, like he owned the room and the people in it. He asked me how many miles I had driven that week. Before I could answer, he said, "You know, Walter, at your age, there is dignity in stepping aside before people have to ask." Emily looked up sharply. "Brandon." He lifted both hands, smiling. "I am only saying your dad has earned rest. Business is different now. It is not the same as hauling boxes down county roads in 1985. I cut my meat and said nothing, not because I had no answer, because Emily's face had gone pale in that way children's faces do when they are grown but still afraid of the room splitting in two. She loved her husband. She loved her father. And I did not yet have the right to put a stack of papers between those two loves and ask her to choose which one was lying. Later that night, Emily walked me to my truck. The porch light made her look younger than she was. "Dad, I am sorry," she said. "He gets stressed." I nodded. Men under stress show what they are made of. She folded her arms against the cold. "Do you think he respects you?" It was the kind of question that already knows the answer, and only asks because the heart is not ready to hear it from itself. I looked at my daughter, at Helen's eyes in her face, and I chose mercy over truth one more time. "I think Brandon respects what he understands," I said, "and he does not understand everything yet." By the end of the second year, Martha's review file had become a locked audit folder. By the fourth year, we stopped pretending the pattern might be accidental. By the sixth, the folder was heavy enough that Martha kept it in the lower drawer of her desk during the day and in the safe after closing. We had copies stored with an outside accountant. We had bank records. We had customer confirmations. We had invoices before and after Brandon touched them. We had enough to know the difference between sloppy management and a man feeding himself from a company he had not built. One evening, after everyone left, Martha spread the summary across the counter, where drivers usually signed their route sheets. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. "Walter," she said, "this is not small anymore." I looked at the final total, then at the old green ledger resting beside it, Helen's handwriting still steady across the first page. 6 months might be a mistake, I said. 6 years is a pattern. That should have been the day I ended it. I know that now. Maybe part of me knew it then, but there is a difference between knowing a man is stealing and deciding the day your daughter's life changes forever. I wanted every page checked twice. I wanted no hole Brandon could crawl through. I wanted the truth so solid that when Emily finally saw it, she would not have to wonder whether her father had mistaken pride for proof. So I waited a little longer. I kept driving. I kept walking around trucks before sunrise. I kept letting Brandon call me Walter in that thin, dismissive tone. I kept watching him stand behind the counter Helen and I had paid for with our youth. And every time he mistook my silence for weakness, the folder got one page heavier. Brandon Cole became the kind of man who liked standing where other people had to look up at him. The dispatch counter was not high, not really, but he used it like a judge's bench. He would stand behind it with one hand on the phone and one hand on a stack of route sheets, deciding who got the good runs, who waited, who got called in on a Saturday, and who lost 2 hours of pay because a customer delayed unloading. The old dispatchers had known every driver's wife, every sick parent, every kid graduating high school. Brandon knew truck numbers, delivery windows, and which men were afraid of losing work. That was enough for him. He liked fear better than loyalty because fear was faster. Loyalty took years to earn. Fear only took one bad schedule and a reminder that another man was always waiting for a job. I watched him change the temperature of the office, one small humiliation at a time. A driver would walk in laughing, see Brandon behind the counter, and lower his voice. A mechanic would come up with a repair note and apologize before he even explained the problem. Office clerks stopped asking questions out loud. They wrote little notes to Martha instead, folded them once, and left them under her keyboard when Brandon went to lunch. I had built Hays County Freight to be noisy in a good way. Drivers arguing about baseball, mechanics teasing each other over bad coffee, dispatchers calling out updates while somebody complained about the printer. Under Brandon, the building still made sound, but it no longer felt alive. It felt watched. He was careful around me at first. Men like Brandon are always careful until they think they understand the shape of your power. In the beginning, he still called me Walter with a thin coat of politeness over it. He would ask about my route like he was doing me a kindness. He would say, "You still good for the Mill Creek run, Walter?" Or, "We can move you to half-days when your body starts telling the truth." I always answered simply, "Truck is ready, load is secured, paperwork is done." The less I gave him, the more he seemed to need to prove. He wanted me irritated. He wanted me embarrassed. He wanted me to snap in front of people so he could turn to Emily and say, "See, your father is losing it." But a man who has driven through black ice with 40,000 pounds behind him learns not to jerk the wheel just because the road gets mean. The first time I saw Luis Ramirez tremble in that office, I nearly ended the whole thing right there. Luis was 27, maybe 28, with a young wife, a baby girl, and the look of a man who still believed hard work would be noticed fairly if he did enough of it. He drove clean, he kept his logs tight, he called ahead when a customer ran behind. He reminded me of the kind of young driver I used to hire in the early years, back when I could look a man in the eye and know whether he would treat a truck like a tool or a toy. That morning, Luis came in holding his cap in both hands. Brandon had called him off the loading schedule and made sure half the office heard why. "Missing freight envelope," Brandon said, tapping a file against the counter. "Customer says payment documentation came back short. That comes out of somebody's hide." Luis shook his head. "I turned in everything they gave me. I put the envelope in the box like always." Brandon smiled without warmth. "Like always is not a receipt. Luis looked toward Martha, but Martha's face stayed still. She had already learned when to speak and when to save a page for later. I was standing near the coffee machine with a paper cup in my hand, close enough to hear every word, old enough to be invisible when men in pressed shirts were performing. Brandon slid a form across the counter. "Sign the deduction acknowledgement, and I will keep it off your review." Luis stared at the paper. "That is $380. Brandon leaned forward. "Then next time, do not lose $380. I knew that number, not because I had seen Luis's paperwork, but because Martha had shown me an invoice discrepancy 2 nights before for the same route. Same customer, same amount, same kind of adjustment Brandon liked to hide under vague language. Fuel offset, handling correction, cash reconciliation. Words that sounded boring enough to survive a quick glance. I set my coffee down so slowly it did not make a sound. Every part of me wanted to step to that counter and tell Luis to move his hand away from the pen. Every part of me wanted to tell Brandon that a man who steals from workers is lower than a thief who steals from strangers. But proof is not just what you know. Proof is what survives when a liar hires another liar to explain it away. So I walked over, stood beside Luis, and said, "You sure you want to sign something you do not understand?" Brandon's eyes moved to me. "This is an office matter, Walter." I looked at Luis, not Brandon. "Ask for a copy before you sign." Luis swallowed and took his hand off the pen. That was the first time Brandon looked at me like I had become more than an old inconvenience. After that, he stopped hiding his contempt. He started giving me the short routes with the worst docks, the customers who made drivers wait 3 hours, the old truck with the heater that coughed more than it warmed. He thought that was punishment. He did not know I had driven worse rigs before he learned to knot a tie. He thought every rough assignment lowered me in the eyes of the company. He did not understand that the men in the garage noticed who still did the work without complaining. A mechanic named Ray told me one morning while replacing a cracked hose, "He's trying to make you quit." I held the flashlight steady and said, "A man who wants me gone should start by knowing what made me stay." Ray looked at me funny, like he heard something under the words, but could not name it. Martha pushed me harder than anyone, not because she was impatient, but because she understood numbers have consequences, even when people pretend they are private. One Thursday evening, after the last truck had pulled out and the office smelled like cold coffee and printer ink, she locked the front door and placed the audit folder between us. It had grown so thick the elastic band bent around it like it was holding back pressure. "Walter," she said, "this is no longer just company money." She opened to a section marked Payroll Adjustments. "If these accounts are questioned, employees may be dragged into something they did not do. Customers, too. And if Brandon keeps shifting entries this way, tax filings become exposed." I rubbed my thumb over the edge of the old ledger beside me. "How long before the outside accountant finishes the cross-check?" "End of the week," she said. "The attorney can review Monday." I nodded. She watched me for a moment. "You are still thinking about Emily?" I did not answer. She softened, but only a little. "Helen would have protected Emily too." But she would not have let Brandon use that love as a hiding place forever. That night, I drove past Emily's house before going home. I did not stop. The porch light was on. Brandon's new black pickup sat in the driveway, washed so clean it reflected the street lamp. Emily's car was beside it, one tire a little low. I almost pulled over to fill it from the portable compressor in my truck. Then I saw her through the front window. She was standing in the kitchen, arms folded, while Brandon talked with one hand moving fast through the air. Even through glass, I could see the shape of the argument. He was explaining. She was absorbing. He was pushing the world into words that made him right and everyone else difficult. I had seen men do that on loading docks and in union meetings and across counters when checks did not clear. A liar does not always begin by denying facts. Sometimes he begins by exhausting the person who asks for them. Emily called me the next morning. I was sitting in my cab outside a cold storage warehouse, waiting on a signature. "Dad," she said, and then paused too long. "Can I ask you something?" I looked at the warehouse door where a forklift beeped in reverse. "Always." She took a breath. "Did Brandon ever talk to you about retiring from the company completely?" There it was. Not a direct attack. A seed planted in a daughter's mind. I kept my voice even. "He has mentioned it. He says you are confusing people by still driving. He says employees do not know whether to treat you like family or staff." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. "And what do you think?" She was quiet. When she spoke again, she sounded small in a way I had not heard since she was a girl. "I think he talks about you like he is trying to make you smaller." I closed my eyes. There are moments when a father wants to hand his child the whole truth like a weapon. But weapons are heavy, and once handed over, they cannot be made light again. "Emily," I said, "when someone tries that hard to make another person small, it usually means there is something they are afraid will be seen." "What is he afraid of?" she asked. I looked at the paperwork on the seat beside me, the freight copy Martha had asked me to compare against the customer record. "I'm working on that." The final week began with rain. Not dramatic rain, not the kind that washes streets clean. Just a steady gray drizzle that made the truck yard shine with oil-colored puddles and turned every boot print into mud. Monday, the outside accountant confirmed what Martha already knew. Tuesday, the attorney marked 3 sections of the file and told me the company had grounds to remove Brandon immediately and pursue civil action, possibly more, depending on what the bank records proved. Wednesday, Martha found one more altered invoice tied to a contract Brandon had personally negotiated. Thursday, Luis came to me behind the garage and said Brandon had cut his hours again. "I do not know what I did wrong," he said. I looked at that young man, at the tiredness around his eyes, and I hated Brandon more for that than for the money. Stealing dollars was one thing. Teaching a good worker to doubt his own honesty was another. Friday morning, I woke before my alarm. The house was dark and quiet. Helen's photograph sat on the dresser, the one Emily had taken at a company picnic years ago, with Helen laughing because one of the drivers had dropped a hot dog into his own boot. I stood there, buttoning my flannel, looking at my wife's face. "Today might be the day," I said aloud. The house gave no answer. Houses never do. But I could almost hear Helen's pencil tapping twice against the kitchen ledger. Paper remembers. I put the old set of truck keys in my pocket, the ones from the first rig we ever bought. Not because I needed them, but because some mornings a man needs to carry the beginning with him when he walks toward an ending. The route that morning was short. A parts delivery out to Whitcomb Repair, and a return stop at a fuel station Brandon hated reimbursing because he claimed their receipts printed too faint. I kept every slip. I always did. The final receipt was for diesel, washer fluid, and a replacement strap approved under company policy. Nothing questionable, nothing large. Just the kind of ordinary paper a decent office would process in 30 seconds. But when I pulled into the yard, I saw Brandon's black pickup parked crooked near the front, taking up part of the walkway like even painted lines were beneath him. Through the office window, I could see him at the counter. Martha was at her desk. Luis stood near the freight board with 2 other drivers. Ray had come in from the garage holding a rag. The room was full enough for Brandon to enjoy an audience. I sat in the cab for a moment with the receipt in my hand, and I understood, with a calmness that surprised me, that this was not an interruption to the plan. This was the plan, arriving on its own feet. Inside, the dispatch office smelled like wet jackets, coffee, and diesel carried in on boots. The old wall clock ticked above the freight board. Phones blinked. A printer clicked and spat out a route sheet nobody picked up. Brandon looked up when I entered, and his face took on that bright, false patience men use when they are about to perform kindness badly. "Walter," he said, drawing out my name. "You need something?" I placed the receipt on the counter. Fuel reimbursement and strap replacement, Whitcomb Run. He did not even look at it properly. He picked it up between 2 fingers, glanced once, and set it down like it was dirty. "We have been over this. You cannot just bring me every little piece of paper and expect approval." Martha's chair made the smallest sound as she shifted. I could feel the room listening. "It is a company expense," I said. "Approved route, approved replacement." Brandon smiled. "By who?" "Policy." He leaned back. "Policy runs through this office." I looked at him. "Is that your final answer as operations manager?" That should have warned him. A careful man would have heard the question under the question. Brandon only heard an old driver challenging his throne. He gave a small laugh and looked around the room to make sure everyone was with him, or at least afraid enough to pretend. "You know what your problem is, Walter. You have been around so long, you think history is authority." Luis looked down. Ray stopped wiping his hands. Martha went still. Brandon pushed the receipt across the counter toward me. "You drive the truck. You turn in what you are told to turn in. You wait like everybody else. You do not question office decisions because Emily is your daughter, or because you knew this place back when it was nothing." The words settled over the room, but he was not done. Men like Brandon always reach for one more stone after the first one lands. He tapped the receipt with his finger. "Honestly, this is embarrassing. Coming in here over a fuel slip, like you are begging me to validate you." He lowered his voice for a second, then raised it again so nobody could miss the sentence he wanted remembered. "You are just the driver." The room went silent. Not quiet, silent. There is a difference. Quiet is when people have nothing to say. Silent is when everyone knows something has gone too far and waits to see who will survive it. The old wall clock ticked above us. Somewhere in the garage, a tool dropped against concrete, sharp and distant. Brandon's smile stayed in place, but it had become fixed now, like he was holding it up with effort. I looked at the fuel receipt. Then I looked at his hand, the watch on his wrist, the counter beneath his palm, the office around him, the freight board with contracts my wife and I had once begged for, the men and women whose paychecks he had treated like pieces on a game board. I thought of Luis almost signing away $380 he did not owe. I thought of Emily asking me what Brandon was afraid of. I thought of Martha carrying 6 years of paper in a locked folder because I had asked her to wait until truth became heavier than denial. My anger did not rise hot. It settled cold. That is the kind of anger a man can use. I picked up the receipt and folded it once. Brandon watched me, enjoying what he thought was surrender. "That is what I thought," he said. I placed the folded receipt in my shirt pocket. Then I turned my head toward Martha. She was already looking at me, and in her eyes I saw 22 years of trust, grief for Helen, and relief that waiting was finally over. I did not speak loudly. I did not need to. "Martha," I said, "bring me the company ledger." Brandon's smile flickered. "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. Martha stood. "Sit down," Brandon snapped. "That is confidential company property." Martha did not sit. She reached into her desk drawer and took out a small ring of keys. The sound of them was tiny, but in that room it landed like thunder. Brandon came around the counter. "Martha," I said no. She looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "I heard you." Then she walked to the lower file cabinet near the back wall, the one nobody touched but her. Brandon turned to me, and for the first time that morning there was something behind his eyes other than contempt. Not fear, yet. Fear needs understanding. This was confusion. The first crack in a man's belief that every locked thing in the building belonged to him. "Walter," he said, trying to recover his tone, "you do not have authority to review those records in front of staff." I looked at the counter, at the place where his hand had rested like a flag. "Then you should have read the first page." Martha unlocked the drawer. The metal slid open. She lifted out the old green ledger first, its corners worn soft from years of use. Then the thick audit folder bound with a dark elastic strap. She carried them both to the counter, and every eye in the office followed those papers as if the room had been waiting 6 years to breathe. Martha placed the old green ledger on the dispatch counter with both hands, gently, almost respectfully, the way a person sets down something that has outlived the people who first touched it. The room stayed silent. Even the phones seemed to blink without ringing. Brandon stood 3 feet from her, his jaw tight. His hand half lifted, like he wanted to snatch the book away, but knew too many eyes were watching. That was the thing about men like Brandon. They were brave only when the room already belonged to them. The moment the room began asking questions of its own, they started calculating. Martha laid the audit folder beside the ledger. The elastic strap around it was stretched from years of paper pressing outward. 6 years of quiet theft. 6 years of altered numbers. 6 years of a man calling workers careless while he used their labor to cover his own hands. Brandon forced a laugh. It sounded thin. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Walter is having one of his dramatic old man moments. Martha, put that away before this becomes a legal issue." Martha did not look at him. She looked at me. I nodded once. She opened the ledger. The first page was old enough that the paper had yellowed at the edges. Helen's handwriting sat there in blue ink, steady as a prayer. Hayes County Freight, original asset record, 2 tractors, 1 leased trailer, 1 kitchen table loan from a man named Franklin Pruitt, who believed in my wife more than he believed in me. Under that, clipped in a clear sleeve, was the ownership amendment from years later, when the company had grown large enough to become more than a husband, a wife, and 2 trucks fighting weather and debt. Martha turned the sleeve toward Brandon so he could see it plainly. My name was printed there. Walter James Hayes, majority owner, founder, authorized principal. My signature sat at the bottom beside the notary's stamp. Not big, not fancy, Just the same plain signature I had used on fuel cards, paychecks, insurance forms, bank notes, and birthday cards to Emily. Brandon stared at it. The room stared at it. A dispatcher named Carla leaned forward like the page had changed the shape of the air. Luis's mouth parted slightly, but he did not speak. Ray the mechanic looked from the paper to me, then down at my flannel shirt like he was seeing it for the first time and realizing it had never meant what Brandon thought it meant. Brandon recovered in pieces. First his eyes hardened, then his shoulders squared. Then the smile came back, but it had lost its shine. "Old paperwork," he said. "That does not mean anything operationally. There are holding arrangements, management assignments, delegated authority. You all do not understand how corporate records work." He turned toward the employees as if you could still educate them back into obedience. "This is exactly why private files should not be opened in front of staff." I let him talk. Sometimes a guilty man will build his own cage if you let him keep explaining. When he finished, I placed one hand on the ledger. "You were right about one thing," I said. "They do not need a lesson in corporate records." I looked at Martha. "They need the payments." Martha removed the elastic strap from the audit folder. It snapped softly against the counter, and Brandon flinched before he could stop himself. Martha opened the folder to the first marked section. "Henderson Foods," she said. Her voice was calm, but everyone in the room heard the change in it. This was not office gossip. This was record. "Original invoice, March 12th, 6 years ago. Customer paid in full. Internal copy later amended to show a handling deduction of $420. She placed both copies side by side. "The deduction does not appear in the customer record. It appears only in our system after management access." Brandon said, "That was a reconciliation issue." Martha turned another page. "Same customer, May 28th. Same adjustment category, different amount. Same management login." She turned another. "August 9th, November 17th, January 3rd. She did not rush. She did not dramatize. She simply laid the pages out one after another until the counter looked less like a workplace and more like a table in a courtroom. Brandon's face began to redden. "You are cherry-picking old errors," he said. "Every company has corrections." Martha opened the second section. "Then let us discuss vendors." There was a maintenance vendor called North Valley Equipment Services. The name sounded real enough. That was the point. The invoices were clean, the amounts believable, the descriptions boring. Tire disposal, brake inspection, emergency parts transfer. The kind of expenses nobody questions if the trucks keep moving. Martha laid out 6 invoices from North Valley and then placed a printed business registration search beside them. "No active company under that name in this county or the surrounding counties during the invoice period," she said. Ray stepped closer, grease still dark in the cracks of his hands. "I never heard of them," he said. Brandon snapped his eyes toward him. "You do not handle vendor approvals." Ray did not step back. "No, but I handled the trucks. If somebody did brake inspections on my rigs for 6 years, I would have seen them." A murmur moved through the office, quiet but real. Brandon looked around sharply, trying to locate the first person to punish, but there were too many faces now and not enough fear. I watched him understand the beginning of his problem. It was not just the ledger. It was not just Martha. It was the fact that every person in that room had carried one small piece of his cruelty, and the folder was giving those pieces a place to connect. A man can make one worker doubt himself. He can make 2 afraid. He can even make an office quiet for a while. But when paper begins proving what people felt in their bones, silence starts changing sides. Martha turned to the fuel reimbursement section. Company policy requires fuel card logs or approved cash reimbursement slips attached to route files. She placed a stack of printed entries in front of Brandon. Over 6 years, there are repeated cash-outs processed under driver initials where the drivers have signed statements that they never received the reimbursement. Brandon pointed at the pages. Drivers forget things all the time. They lose receipts. They complain when deductions happen. This is normal. Luis looked up then, not quickly, not bravely in the way movies show it. He looked like a young man pushing through shame because truth had finally opened a door. "I did not forget," he said. His voice cracked on the first word, but he kept going. "That missing envelope from Whitcomb last month. You made me sign a deduction acknowledgement." Brandon turned on him. "Luis, do not insert yourself into records you do not understand." Luis stepped closer to the counter. "I understood $380 was coming out of my check." His hand trembled, but he put it on the edge of the paper Martha had laid out. "And that number is right there." Everybody looked. The amount was there. $380. Not lost, not mistaken. Reclassified. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. That was the first moment he had no sentence ready. For 6 years his words had been faster than other people's confidence. Now the numbers were faster than him. I asked him quietly, "Who created that adjustment?" Brandon swallowed. "I would have to review the system." Martha slid another page forward. "Already reviewed. Management login assigned to Brandon Cole. Timestamp 6:42 p.m. after Luis's root file was submitted." Brandon reached for the paper. Martha put her hand over it. The movement was small, but the whole room seemed to lean into it. "Copies are with the attorney," she said. "These are not the only set." Brandon looked at me then, really looked. Maybe for the first time since he had entered my daughter's life. Not at the old shirt, not at the boots, not at the gray hair or the hands he thought belonged only to steering wheels and fuel pumps. He looked at me like a locked door had suddenly spoken. "You set me up," he said. The words came out low. "You let me work here. You let me make decisions. And you sat in a truck pretending to be harmless while you watched me." I heard Emily in that accusation, though she was not there yet. I heard the story he would try to tell her. Poor Brandon, trapped by the bitter old father-in-law who never wanted him in the family. Poor Brandon, punished for modernizing an old business. Poor Brandon. Misunderstood by people too simple to understand his genius. I had known men like him my whole life. When caught with their hand in another man's pocket, they first complain about the pocket. "No," I said. "I gave you trust because my daughter loved you. I gave you authority because this company needed help in the office. I gave you time because I did not want to accuse family on suspicion." I tapped the folder once. "You used all 3. Brandon's eyes moved toward the door, then toward the employees, then toward the office phone. His mind was running routes now, looking for an exit. "This is not proof of theft," he said. "This is accounting interpretation." Martha turned another page. "Then interpret this." She laid down the bank confirmation from a customer payment that had been split and routed through a secondary account tied to a vendor authorization Brandon had created. The air left his face, not all at once, but enough that I saw it. Enough that Martha saw it. Enough that Luis, Ray, Carla, and every person in that room understood we had moved past mistakes. Ray said, "How much?" No one answered at first. Martha looked at me, not because she did not know, but because saying a total out loud changes a room forever. I nodded. She read the figure. It was not a number that buys a yacht or a mansion. It was worse, in a way. It was the kind of number made of other people's overtime, delayed reimbursements, underpaid routes, denied repairs, customer trust, and a daughter's marriage slowly rotting around a secret. The room did not gasp. Real people rarely gasp at money. They go still. They begin calculating what that money meant in rent, groceries, medical bills, tires, school clothes, second jobs, sleepless nights. Luis lowered his eyes. Ray whispered something I could not hear. Carla put a hand over her mouth. Brandon's anger finally broke through his polish. "You all are acting like I stole from you personally," he said. That was the wrong sentence. He knew it the moment it left him. Luis looked up. Ray's face changed. Martha closed the folder halfway and stared at him with the kind of disappointment that has no heat left in it. I stepped closer to the counter. "You did," I said. "You stole from the drivers whose reimbursements you delayed. You stole from the mechanics whose repair requests you questioned while fake vendors got paid. You stole from customers who trusted our invoices. You stole from Emily every night you came home pretending your new watch was ambition instead of evidence." His jaw worked. "Do not bring my wife into this. You brought her into it the day you used her love for you as cover." That was when the front door opened. Emily stepped inside with rain on her coat and worry already on her face. I had not called her. Martha had, as we planned if the folder ever opened in public. Emily stopped just inside the doorway. She looked first at me, then Brandon, then the papers spread across the counter. The room shifted uncomfortably. Family pain is harder to witness than business trouble. Brandon saw her and moved fast, the way drowning men move toward anything that floats. "Emily," he said, crossing to her. "Good. You need to hear this from me before your father turns it into something ugly. He has been building a case against me for years because he never wanted me in the company." Emily did not move toward him. Her eyes stayed on the ledger. "What is that?" she asked. Brandon tried to take her arm. "It is nothing you need to read right now." She pulled back, not violently, just enough. "Then why are you afraid of me reading it?" I watched that question hit him harder than any document had. Emily walked to the counter. Martha turned the ledger so my daughter could see the first page. For a moment, the years folded in on themselves. Emily was 6 again, sitting on the running board pretending to command a fleet. Emily was 12, helping Helen stamp envelopes at the kitchen table. Emily was 23, crying into my shoulder the night her mother died. Emily was a grown woman now, staring at the proof that her father had been standing behind more than a steering wheel all along. Her fingers touched Helen's handwriting. "Mom wrote this," she said. Her voice was so quiet it almost disappeared. "Yes," I said. "She did." Martha placed the ownership document beside it. Emily read my name. Then she read the first audit summary, then the second. Brandon began speaking before she finished, because liars hate silence when someone else controls it. "Those are selected documents. Your father is manipulating this. He kept secrets from you too, Emily. Ask him why he pretended to be just a driver. Ask him why he let me run operations if he supposedly owned everything. Ask him why he humiliated me in front of my staff." Emily lifted her eyes from the folder. "Your staff?" Brandon froze. 2 words, that was all it took. Not a speech, not a scream, just 2 words that showed she had heard the ownership document, the room, the truth beneath his language. "Emily," he said, softer now. "I was trying to build something for us." She looked at the papers again. "With money that was not yours?" "It is more complicated than that." "Did you take it?" The room held its breath. Brandon looked at me, then at Martha, then back at his wife. "I made decisions in a difficult business environment." Emily nodded slowly, and I saw something in her face close. Not love, maybe. Love does not always close quickly. But the door he used to walk through without knocking had finally shut. "Did you take it?" she asked again. He said nothing. Sometimes silence is not dignity. Sometimes it is confession without the courage to use words. I did not let the moment become a family trial. Emily had enough pain without an audience feeding on it. I turned to Brandon. "You are removed from operations effective immediately. Your access is frozen. Company accounts tied to your authorization are locked as of this morning. The attorney has the file. You will leave the building now." Brandon stared at me. "You cannot just throw me out." I looked at Martha. She picked up the office phone. "The access revocation is already entered," she said. "Your company email, dispatch login, vendor approval, and fuel authorization are disabled." Brandon turned toward the computer behind the counter as if he could prove her wrong by looking at the screen. Carla, the dispatcher, glanced at her monitor. "It logged him out," she said. There was no triumph in her voice, only relief. That relief hurt him more than anger would have. He looked at the room, waiting for one person to object. No one did. The same people who had lowered their voices when he entered now watched him without bending. Luis stood straighter. Ray folded his arms. Martha kept one hand on the ledger. Emily stepped away from him when he moved toward the door, and that small space between husband and wife said what no legal paper could. Brandon looked back at me one last time. The contempt was gone. Hate remained. But hate is not power. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" he said. "No," I answered. "It makes me the man who should have stopped you sooner." For some reason, that was the sentence that broke his face. Not because he felt guilt. Men like Brandon rarely give you that gift. It broke because I had not given him the fight he wanted. I had given him a fact he could not use. After he left, nobody spoke for several seconds. The front door closed behind him with a soft metal click. Rain blurred the glass. Outside, his black pickup started, idled too hard, then pulled away from the walkway he had parked across that morning. Inside, the dispatch office remained full of papers, people, and all the things that had finally been said without shouting. I turned to Luis. "That deduction will be reversed today." He nodded once, but his eyes had gone wet. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." The title moved through the room before anyone else repeated it. Not loud, not forced, but I heard it differently from every mouth that used it after that morning. "Mr. Hayes," not Walter, said with pity. Not old man, not driver, spoken like a ceiling. "Mr. Hayes," spoken like they had found the name where it had always been. Ray cleared his throat. "So, you really built this place?" I looked at him, then at the ledger. "Helen and I did." Carla said, "Why keep driving?" I smiled a little, though I was tired in a way sleep would not fix. Because trucks do not care what title a man has. They only care whether he checks the lines before asking someone else to trust the road. Ray nodded like that answer made more sense than any business seminar Brandon had ever dragged them through. Martha began gathering the audit copies, sorting them back into order. Her hands shook once, just once, then steadied. "Helen would have liked that line," she said. I looked at the old page with my wife's handwriting and felt the ache open quietly behind my ribs. Helen would have told me it took too long. The office slowly emptied. Not all at once. People returned to work because freight still had to move. Trucks still had to leave. Customers still had to receive what they were promised. That is the thing about justice in a working place. It does not stop the day. It lets the day continue, cleaner than before. Luis went to check his route. Ray returned to the garage. Carla called a customer and used a steadier voice than she had used in months. Martha took the audit folder back to her desk, but she left the ledger on the counter, open to the first page. I think she did it for Emily, or maybe for me. Some proof does not need to be locked away the moment it has done its job. Emily stayed by the counter after everyone else moved on. She kept her fingertips on the edge of the ledger, but did not turn another page. Her face had changed several times in the last 20 minutes. Shock, anger, shame, grief, understanding. Now she looked exhausted, not weak. Exhausted in the way people look when a truth they avoided has finally finished arriving. "Dad," she said, then stopped. I waited. I had waited 6 years. I could wait for my daughter to find one sentence. She looked at the audit folder on Martha's desk, then at the ownership document, then at me. "How long did you know?" I could have softened it. I could have said, "Not long." I could have protected her from the full shape of it one more time. But protection had brought us to this counter, and truth deserved a better ending. "I suspected pieces for 6 years, I said. I knew enough to be afraid by the 2nd. I knew enough to act by the 4th. I waited until the proof could stand without me. Emily's eyes filled. "Because of me?" That question was the one I had dreaded more than Brandon's rage, more than the attorney, more than any number in Martha's folder. I stepped closer but did not touch her yet. Grown children deserve the dignity of choosing whether they want comfort. "Because I did not want to put you between your husband and your father with nothing but my word in my hand," I said. "And because I was wrong to think waiting hurt you less." A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily. "He made me think you were confused. He said you could not let go. He said you were hanging around the company because you did not know who you were without it." I looked at the ledger. Maybe there was some truth in the last part. She shook her head. "No." "He used the truth like a knife. That is different." I reached into my pocket and took out the old truck keys. The metal was worn smooth from years of being carried, turned, dropped, found, and carried again. I placed them on the ledger beside Helen's handwriting. Emily looked at them and gave a small, broken laugh. "Are those from the first truck?" "Second," I said. "The first one died angry outside Topeka." She laughed again, and this time the sound hurt less. "Mom told me you cried when that truck got hauled off." "Your mother exaggerated." Emily looked at me. "Did she?" I sighed. "A little." She touched the keys with one finger. I remember sitting in that truck. You gave orders from the running board. I thought I owned the whole company. You had the voice for it. For a moment, the room gave us back something Brandon had not managed to steal. A memory with no invoice attached to it. Then Emily whispered, "You were never just the driver." The words landed differently from Brandon's. Same shape around one word, completely different meaning. When Brandon said driver, he meant small. When Emily said it, she saw the miles, the storms, the men trained, the payrolls met, the wife who kept books at midnight, the father who carried more than freight because you did not know how to put family down. I looked at my daughter and felt 6 years of silence loosen inside my chest. "No," I said. "But driving taught me who was worth carrying." She stepped into me then, and I held her the way I had held her when she was a child and woke from nightmares she could not explain. Only this time, the nightmare had a name, a paper trail, and a door it had just walked out of. Later, after Emily left with Martha to call the attorney and ask what came next, I walked into the garage. The rain had stopped. Water dripped from the roof edges in steady silver lines. One of the trucks idled near Bay 3, ready for the afternoon run. Ray was under the hood, Luis checking straps near the dock. They both looked up when I entered. Nobody saluted. Nobody made a speech. Thank God for that. Working men know when words would only make a thing smaller. Luis simply nodded. Ray said, "Truck 18 is ready, Mr. Hayes." I walked around it out of habit. Tire pressure, brake lines, oil stains, straps, lights, mirrors. The same checks I had done when I was poor, when I was grieving, when I was underestimated. When my own son-in-law thought he could stand in my building and tell me I was nothing but the man behind the wheel. Before I climbed into the cab, I looked back through the glass toward the dispatch office. The old green ledger was still open on the counter. Martha stood near it, speaking into the phone with her reading glasses low on her nose. Emily sat beside her, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee she had not touched. The freight board behind them was full. Routes, names, times, promises. The company would have hard days after that. Lawyers, bank reviews, customer calls. Emily's marriage would not mend just because the truth had arrived. Luis would still need his money back. Martha would still need to rebuild systems Brandon had poisoned. Justice does not erase damage. It only stops pretending the damage is normal. I started the truck and listened to the engine settle. For 6 years, Brandon Cole believed silence meant weakness. He believed a flannel shirt meant ignorance, work boots meant low status, and a man who did not announce his power must not have any. He stood behind a counter he had not built, spent money he had not earned, and used my daughter's love like a locked door. But paper remembers. Ledgers remember. Workers remember. And sometimes an old driver remembers everything long enough for the right document to speak. That morning I did not need to shout. I did not need to prove I was bigger than the insult. I only needed the first page opened in front of the people he had taught to look down. Because in the end, the man who called me just the driver never understood the road at all.